I have a full group yet, so we're going to wait a couple minutes before we get started. Thank you. All right, it looks like people are starting to join. We've got a packed agenda today, so I think I'm just going to launch right into it. So, welcome to the third meeting of the Low Carbon Fuels Policy Working Group. Thank you for joining and contributing to this process. So, my name is Michael Friels. I'm a policy analyst at the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm joined by a team of ODO staff here to support this meeting. So, Jessica Rikers will be leading discussion and also looking for raised hands or activities in the chat. Jillian DeMedio will help facilitate discussion and answer questions. She's an expert in transportation, certainly help us with that. Josh Price is available for any technical assistance you may need. So if you do run into any technical issues, please send a direct message in the chat to Josh. And you may have actually received some emails from Josh, hopefully a link to the Miro board. So if you're having trouble with WebEx and it's easier to email, that's also a good way to communicate with Josh directly. We also have a variety of other ODO staff here to support this meeting and may jump in to help us answer a question as needed. So as I go through, I'm going to talk through a few slides at a time and then pause to see if there are some questions. So please raise your virtual hand if you have a question or a thought. You can also post questions in the meeting chat, and Jessica will let me know what people are having to say, and we can address those. And also a friendly reminder, we are recording this meeting as well as we've recorded all of our previous meetings. So if you've missed a meeting in the past, I encourage you to go back and listen to those to make sure you're understanding everything that's happening. And ideally, we're trying to have all the meetings build upon each other as we try to develop policy recommendations. And those recordings are available on the Oregon Energy Strategy website. And maybe we'll somebody could put a link in the chat. That would be great. All right, so can we go to the next slide, please? So Oregon Department of Energy's purpose. So the Department of Energy helps Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. And the development of the Oregon Energy Strategy and policy strategies we're going to talk about today are helping us shape an equitable clean energy transition and balance the needs of all communities in Oregon, and we're excited about that. So if we go to the next slide. We are using the WebEx platform, as you can see, and just some highlights on how to use WebEx if you're not as familiar. Down below, you can see there's a button to mute or unmute yourself. I do ask that if other people are speaking, you do mute yourself. You can turn on and off your video. Certainly when I'm presenting, it's okay if you want to have your video off, but once we get to the activity and discussion phase, I'd love for people to turn on their video. Certainly it can help us interact and kind of have some fruitful discussions as we're talking through some interesting policy areas. There's also the ability to raise your hand in the chat function over to the right. So hopefully you can see that lower in the bottom lower right-hand corner, you can click on, there's kind of a bubble there. If you click on it, the chat will come up and you can use that. If you're having any troubles with that, please let us know and we can help you with that, specifically Josh. Okay, and then I do want to highlight, if you're a member of the public that's joining, certainly we appreciate your feedback. You don't have the ability to add stuff in the chat or raise your hand, but you do have the ability to use our public comment portal to provide information for us, whether that's questions or feedback or your thoughts. We certainly appreciate it. And we can put a link in the chat to that public comment portal so you can access it. We go next slide. So for introduction today, we do have a really full agenda. And so For introductions, I'd love for people just to put their introductions within the chat, just to help us know who's here today. So please include your name, affiliation, so we can get a sense of who's here. And even better, if you have some fun spring break plans you'd like to share with the group. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a friendly kind of reminder about the role of the policy working group. So we are developing policy ideas, focus on the role of fuels in Oregon. So we won't actually vote on these ideas, but we will do our best to kind of refine them and then share them with other policy working groups, the Energy Strategy Advisory Group, state agencies, and they'll go through a public review process after our meetings are done. And so these recommendations may evolve over time as Odo receives feedback. And so I just want to kind of level set with you on that. So going to the next slide. And a reminder on where we are in the process. So in our last meeting, we identified some issues and barriers around development of low carbon fuels and how they're going to be used in Oregon. And so right now we're in meeting 3. So we're going to take those barriers and then start talking about strategies to overcome them. And so it'll be kind of a fun process. We'll do an activity day in Miro and work on that. And then coming out of this meeting, I'm going to try to consolidate, collect all those different ideas and put them in a format that then I'll send back out to the group. And you can, I'd like you to kind of take a look at them, react to them, and give some feedback in our public comment portal based on where we're at. And then our next meeting in April, we'll work further on trying to refine those policy ideas into some potential policy actions or recommendations for the final report. Okay, so if we can go to the next meeting or next slide. So meeting objectives today. So we're trying to identify policy gaps or opportunities, discuss strategies, address the barriers that we've identified in the previous meeting, and determine what we need as we try to categorize those potential ideas into, is it changing existing policy? Is it a whole new policy that we need for Oregon, or is it something we need to better understand as a potential solution? So next slide. So our agenda today, so we're briefly going to check in on the model, try to do some feedback based on our previous meeting and some questions we had about the model. We'll review what we've been hearing in other policy working groups, and then we're going to get into our policy strategy development activity in Miro. And hopefully that will be the bulk of our time is actually spent doing that brainstorming and that work on the Miro board, which I'm excited about. About halfway through, we're going to try to take a 10-minute break, ideally around 10:30, 10:40. We'll see how it lines up with the activities we're doing, and we'll do our best to be done by noon today. So our next slide, please. So just a reminder, we're hoping to have robust conversations today. Please listen carefully, seek to learn, understand each other's perspectives. We want to encourage respectful, candid, and constructive conversation. Keep an open mind, ask questions to clarify, be open, transparent, inclusive, and accountable. Please respect differing opinions in the room and seek to resolve differences wherever possible and find common ground. And be conscious of your speaking time. So we want to make sure everybody gets an opportunity to speak and contribute to this process. And I'll flag ahead of time. If we haven't heard from you, we might call on you. We'd love to have everybody to speak and contribute to this process. So I'll pause there to see if we have any questions about kind of the setup today. Okay. Jessica, it sounds like we don't have any questions.
I see no raised hands nor any questions in the chat, so let's go.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, we'll keep rolling here. Can we go to the next slide? All right, so the energy model. So in the previous meeting we heard concerns about kind of the energy model results and how they related to fuels. And since then we had our fuels focused energy modeling office hours, and I hope that was helpful for those who attended to provide more details around the modeling and how it works. But I do want to do kind of a brief grounding on the value of the model and provide a little bit of info based on the feedback we received last time. So the energy model is a tool to help us understand important relationships across the energy sector and how choices may change Oregon's energy landscape. So it's a starting point for our policy discussions, and hopefully, we can kind of set the model aside and kind of move forward with our policy ideas. But thinking about the model itself is an opportunity for us to kind of inform our decision making by eliminating kind of the pros and cons, the trade-offs of moving one direction or another for Oregon. And the model is also trying to determine the least cost approach to some of these decarbonization paths. And so in some cases, we may determine that's not the right choice for Oregon. So in our policy conversation, that's our opportunity to kind of do that. So for example, one approach may cost more for Oregon, but it may offer greater resilience or a great opportunity for economic growth for the state. And this is an opportunity for us to kind of discuss and weigh those trade-offs. And again, the model is not a prediction of the future. It's an investigation of energy choices. So by modeling targets to 2050, we can use that information to talk about near-term actions and policy graphs or opportunities that may be needed. Hopefully we'll have some of those conversations today. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. So last meeting, there was a lot of questions kind of around like the role of biofuel and kind of hydrogen demand and some concerns around there might be kind of an outsized role of hydrogen within the model. And so we created this visualization just to kind of compare biofuel and hydrogen demand over time in the reference scenario of the model to provide you a little bit more detail. So as you can see, biofuel consumption far exceeds hydrogen, but hydrogen does take on a larger role as we get closer to 2050. And this is interesting, and this demand could be met by other resources, admittedly. So this may be an opportunity for us for further research and study. And it also kind of highlights the need to maybe better understand from the test projects of the Pacific Northwest Hydrogen Hub. And I also want to note the gradual decline in biofuel demand over time within the visualization. So this reflects the gradual electrification of the transportation sector. And if we go to the next slide. And this is also reflected here. So you can see the transportation sector fuel demand, especially the fossil fuels, declining over time, even in the delayed scenario. So we've got the reference scenario, and then we've got the delayed transportation electrification scenario, and the no advanced clean trucks rule. Even in those scenarios, fossil fuel demand over time does decline in order to reach our decarbonization goals. And as a result, as that demand for transportation fuel or fossil fuels decline, biofuels declines as well over time. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide. So remember in a previous meeting, I shared Oregon's fuel mix for 2022 transportation fuels, and I received a request for more updated data. So if we go to the next slide, so 2023 data, which is the most recent available data set available to us, is here. And so as you can see, it's changed a little bit. Of note, it's interesting to note that renewable diesel past biodiesel market share represents 5.68% of Oregon's fuel mix. So it's growing, and so it's actually greater than biodiesel and a significant portion. And we're expecting that to increase even more. And we'll see once 2024 all data is, and we can take a look at how that's changed over time. And then if we go to the next slide, we also received a request to kind of take a look at California's fuel mix and kind of demonstrate where Oregon's fuel market may be headed. They may be a couple of years ahead of us in the market. And so these are charts for California's low carbon fuel standard program. The chart on the left is low carbon fuel volumes, and the chart on the right shows credit generation from these fuels in the program. So as we evaluate low carbon fuel discussions, especially in the near term, it's good to consider where we are at the current trajectory and where we would like to be. So you can notice kind of the growth in California system. You can see in green the significant growth of renewable diesel, certainly the growth in electricity, but also biomethane, so biogas used in transportation fuels. Okay, so please keep this in mind as we're looking at potential policy strategies. And I will pause there and see if we have any questions about some of the modeling results and some of the additional information that I wanted to provide you. I know I ran through this really quickly, but I want to make as much time as we can for discussion.
Hey, Michael, this is Sam Way with the Coalition for Renewable Natural Gas.
Yeah,
Can you
Sam,
just
please.
describe a little bit the step back up in 2050 of biofuel use? It looked like there was, a big jump at the end there.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Sam. So within the model, as you can see, well, actually, if you go to the slide right below this one, the next slide, you can see that the fossil fuel use dramatically declines, but there's a huge jump at the end, and it's to meet demand in maritime and air travel, aviation. And so you actually see this like light duty vehicles, medium, and some heavy duty vehicle demand dramatically decrease for fossil fuels. But then we see the switch over at kind of the end in 2050 to decarbonize more maritime aviation, and biofuels meet that demand. And so there's a dramatic increase.
Thanks. Why wouldn't we be attempting to have biofuels serve those sectors earlier than that, or transition from on-road to those sectors in a more gradual way?
Yeah. And I think that's certainly in the model. That's something you could say, well, I don't think it would be as abrupt as that. And that's certainly the difference between like modeling results and maybe what you think is a more realistic approach, or what the market would actually do. I think that's a good point to make. Yeah. And so I think that's something to consider as we're looking at potential strategies of, would it be more gradual, and would those things change immediately, and would markets with aviation maritime see that they need to decarbonize and initiate that earlier? Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts about that, Sam?
I agree with that. Thanks a lot for clarifying.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as far as strategies of how, abrupt changes would be really challenging in the market, and how can we gradually do that, or anticipate what's coming, and develop kind of near, midterm, or long-term strategies for that. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
I'm not seeing any other questions, Michael. I do want to just flag for folks, if you haven't introduced yourselves in the chat, go ahead and throw your name in there and any fun plans you have for spring break.
Okay, well, given no other questions, so let's talk a little bit about the policy working group. So obviously we've been having our meetings, but the other working groups have been meeting as well. And so I wanted to update you on some of the conversations that have been happening in those policy working groups, and they're relevant to our conversations, and also acknowledge that there's some overlap in kind of the subject areas in these energy conversations. And I also encourage the people who on this call who may have attended some of these other meetings to jump in and give some insights, or share what they've been hearing in these meetings. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. So in the Environmental Justice Equity Working Group, it was expressed that tribes have shown an interest in selling carbon offsets from wildfire prevention efforts and finding use for potential fuel feedstocks, which is really interesting. And there's a need for increased access to low carbon fuels in rural areas. So throughout Oregon, I think we've certainly mentioned that within our group, wanting to make sure that distribution of low carbon fuels is available throughout the state. There's also a need for education and awareness building materials that serve a variety of different communities. And the group also identified a need for research into air and water pollution from facilities, because that's a real concern in communities. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. In the Transportation Electrification Working Group, they discussed high upfront and operational costs of zero emission vehicles and the corresponding infrastructure, which I know we've talked about, and certainly came up in our various conversation, around, and also the limitations of meeting heavy duty vehicle technology right now, and kind of the challenges of transitioning fleets to zero emission vehicles. They also discussed the barriers to development of electric vehicle charging, and a lack of transportation options in some rural communities, and some kind of concerns, or I guess barriers to vehicle miles traveled reduction. All right, we go to the next slide. In the Clean Electricity Generation and Transmission Group, they discussed the benefits of integrated electricity and natural gas long-term planning. I believe that came up in some of our barrier discussion as well. And there was some concern around with the kind of statewide impacts of limited information and decentralized planning and procurement efforts. Also, there was some differing thoughts about the role of gas resources to support electricity grid resilience, as you can see in these quotes. And that's something we certainly talked about, and it's a big subject area, and we'll talk about it today, of the role of kind of fuels providing that support to the electricity grid. All right, we go to the next slide. And finally, in the Building Electrification, Efficiency, and Distributed Energy Resources Group, they identified the need for consumer education to convey the benefits of efficient electrification upgrades. I know we highlighted education and awareness as a barrier. There's also a lack of skilled workforce in many rural parts of the state. Particularly, they were thinking of like HVAC contractors, but certainly we mentioned the need for a skilled workforce in low carbon fuel development and other opportunities. They also discussed a lack of a viable alternative fuel for many like large commercial and industrial applications. And so, when we're talking about supply and the need for low carbon fuels, that certainly will come into play and important to keep in mind. And there was also a desire for more holistic planning of gas and electric utilities at the statewide level. Okay, so those are some of the highlights I pulled out of some of those working group conversations. I will pause and see if people have questions, or even better, if somebody has attended one of these meetings and would like to contribute some insights that they've heard.
Well, Michael, I'm not seeing any hands. I do want to flag a comment. Dave was Dave Van Hoff was indicating that he appreciated Sam's point that he made earlier. And I just want to remind folks that the model is different than what you are probably used to in a lot of other forums, excuse me, from the state. It's not the energy strategy. So we're not going to pick one of the modeling scenarios and say, this is how the state should go. What that model did is provide information for all of us to consider about what the economy-wide effects of different policy options would be. And so if, for example, Sam and Dave are interested in an earlier transition to low carbon fuels, the activities that we're going to engage in today, that's the exact right place to flag that for us. Because this information is what is going to be informing the energy strategy. So it's really important that you get that stuff down when we get to those activities. So just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so we don't have any other questions. So this is great. So we're right on schedule. If we can move to our activity today. And before we jump into Miro activity, well, hopefully you've received an email from Josh with a link to the Miro board. Please let us know if you haven't, and we can also put the link to the Miro board in the chat, so you can go to it there as well. If we go to the next slide, I do want to remind everyone, I know it's been a little while, on how to navigate Miro. So you can use your mouse, you can use trackpad or a touchscreen to move around the board. I know it's kind of funky. Sometimes I use kind of the mouse as well as the arrow keys on my keyboard to kind of navigate around there. If you see in the upper left, there is the arrow that you can kind of use to click on, and you select a tool or switch hand mode. Also, there's also the stickies over there that you can grab. And if we go to the next slide, we have pre-populated some stickies on there that you can certainly use. You click on the stickies and can start typing in them. But if you want to add more stickies, if you look at the toolbar on the left, you can see a little about halfway down, or a little over halfway down, you've got a square with that folded edge, and this is the icon to grab a sticky and bring it over. Okay, so if you haven't already, let's try to all transition to the Miro board. And if you haven't had a link or you don't see it in the chat, please let us know, but hopefully we'll get everybody to the Miro board now, so we can do our brainstorm activity. All right. So Josh is sharing our screen here of going to the board. So we're going to start. So at the top, you should see low carbon fuel development and a vertical big blue box on the left there. Okay. So the activity we're going to do is we're going to start with identifying some potential solutions to the barriers that we've talked about. And then we're going to do kind of a sorting activity. So the first part is we're going to talk through, we'll give you 5 minutes of kind of quiet time, and you can write out some solutions to potential barriers. And then we'll do a sorting activity and do some discussion after that. So having the barrier conversation last time, what I did was try to collect all that information and try to consolidate it as best I can into kind of issue statements. And so if you see that vertical box on the left under issue statements and barriers, so that's kind of the consolidation of some of those issues and barriers, specifically focused on low carbon fuel development. And so if you remember, we've kind of broken up our discussion by the model key findings, the 4 model key finding areas. And so that we need more low carbon fuel development, that fuels will be maybe used for electricity generation, discussion of electrification, and then decreasing fuel use over time and the impact of that. And so right now we're going to start with low carbon fuel development. And in reviewing all the barriers kind of listed around low carbon fuel development, a couple of themes kind of emerge. And this first one is production and distribution. And so you can look at that vertical box on the left and kind of identify some barriers and start thinking about within production and distribution, what are some potential strategies to address that? And we've got some questions up above that you can see. How can Oregon secure supply and access to low carbon fuels? Where do existing sources of financial and technical assistance need to evolve? What is the role of existing infrastructure? Those are just kind of teaser questions to start thinking about what solutions might look like. And so we've got these purple stickies. So I would ask that you grab a sticky and start typing out what you think of as a potential strategy or solution. And I failed to mention on that box to the left, so I've got the issue statement and barriers, but I've also got some existing related policies just to start thinking about if you're thinking about changing an existing policy or improving upon it, or if you're thinking about what things need to be addressed. That's just there for reference as well as the barriers. So I will pause and see if anybody has any questions about the activity. Okay, so if you just click on the sticky itself and you can start typing out your idea of what you think would be a potential strategy to address some of the barriers that we identified previously, specifically focused on production and distribution of low carbon fuel development. Okay. Jessica, do we have any questions or things in the chat you should be aware of?
Nothing in the chat, no hands raised. So I think people are probably feeling like this is old hat at this point. They know how to do it. I do want to flag though, if you're on your phone or if you're just otherwise unable to operate or work with the Miro, you can throw into the chat your ideas, and Hugh Arsenault will help put those into the sticky notes, so we can facilitate that for you. You can either just put it into the chat to everyone or write it to Hugh directly. Either way, we're happy to help facilitate that.
Awesome. And then Josh, would you mind putting up a timer at the upper right if you haven't already? I guess I don't see it. And then, so we'll give you 5 minutes to start coming up with ideas. I'll try to give you about a 1-minute warning when we're wrapping up. And then after the 5 minutes, we'll start talking about this. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Just jumping in to let you know you got about a minute to finish up your thoughts here. At least before a conversation, you can continue to add to that. All right, so that is our timer. Feel free to keep adding though if things stand out to you. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started in on the conversation. I am curious about one of the items that I see listed up there, which is clear guidelines around prudency determinations that will encourage investment. Is this for the person who added that in there? If I'm curious if we're talking about through Oregon PUC regulatory proceedings, if that's what we're talking about, and also if there's any more specific items around this that that person might want to share. You can just come off mute if you want to.
Yeah, this is Devin McGrail. I'm the Renewable Resources Manager for Cascade Natural Gas. I posted this comment. I think a lot of utilities that I've talked to have expressed some kind of concerns about some of the nebulousness around what's going to be deemed as acceptable procurement for low carbon fuels. I think a lot of us are very excited and eager to procure this stuff, but I think there's a lot of fear around what will be deemed as prudent versus non-prudent from PUCs when going in for whether it's rate cases or PGA filings, however, or special filings, however that recovery might happen. So I think having clear guidelines, obviously nobody expects pre-approval or anything like that, but clear guidelines and understanding of what the rules of the game are going to be so that when procurement decisions are being made, people understand what is expected of them when evaluating those, I think will be very helpful.
Thanks, Devin. I appreciate that. Is there any, I guess I'm wondering if there's any sort of model guidance that you're aware of outside of the state of Oregon that we might be interested in looking at, or if there's any guidance that you've heard of that you think would be helpful in that respect?
In my experience, no, but I'm happy to see if I can find anything and I'll forward anything along that I might find.
That would be great. Or even just adding your thoughts around what prudency guidelines might look like. That's also very helpful. Anyone, not just Sam, but anyone.
Well, one thought.
Sorry, Devin.
No worries. One thought that I did have, I know, and I'm not too familiar with it. I don't know if anybody from, oh, I see Brittany is on the call. Maybe Brittany could actually weigh in on this, not to put you on the spot, Brittany, but I know they did have some conversations around some procurement decisions they made and then using whether it's an RFP process or some kind of barometer tied to doing an RFP, soliciting bids, and then using those as the benchmark for decisions. That was, I think, restricted or kind of confined to just the Northwest Natural filing. So kind of something like that, but on a larger scale, I think could be potentially of value.
Excellent. I didn't realize Brittany had joined. Is she here? Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Sorry, I had an overlapping meeting.
No.
But yeah, kind of, Kevin. No, I mean, in general, we do run an RFP annually for offtake only. But all in all, we still have no certainty of regulatory rate recovery on any of our renewables projects. So it's still very nebulous the way we look at it too. We don't, yeah, as you say, like it just says we have to show prudency, but that's really not defined. And when we have two renewable natural gas projects, and when those projects were put in place, it was a struggle to get those through our rate case because it was so nebulous and there wasn't any certainty on them. And I back what Devin says. I think that's a lot of our barriers is just being able to really understand what would be qualifying for a rate recovery and what does that process look like.
Yeah, thanks, Brittany. I think that's great. And I'm wondering if, like, what we saw in the model, it indicates that we're going to have some sort of flexible generation in the last 10, especially last 5 years, to be able to balance out the variable renewables on the system. And I'm wondering if there's a space in that area around prudency, like understanding that there's an important role for gas in the future, but that we're also trying to decarbonize the gas that's being used. And if that's something that's been discussed or talked about in those kinds of proceedings. And I see, Kara, I see your hand up, and I'll move to you next, but just curious, Brittany.
We have SB 98 that allows us to voluntarily invest up to 5% revenue. But yeah, the prudency isn't defined, or there's no definition around that.
So it's like when the utilities are working with the PUC, defining prudency is sort of an open-ended question. The utilities propose what they think is prudent, and then the PUC reviews it and provides feedback on that. But there's no standing guidelines around it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. And for us to be able to put a project through, you have to you don't put in the rate case until you already invest in the project, build it, and then you put in your rate case. So having any kind of standardized definition of prudency before you make those investments would be ideal.
That's great. I appreciate that insight. I certainly didn't realize that it worked that way on my part, so that's very helpful. Thanks, Brittany. Kara, I see your hands up.
Yeah, thanks so much. I was curious if we could can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Sometimes my microphone is weird. If we could hear from Brittany and Derek a little bit, because they're, obviously the Public Utility Commission engages in a very somewhat, I would say in-depth analytical process before the rate case. So the integrated resource plan, right, that each utility has to produce. And in that planning, the gas utilities are able to identify what their short-term action plan is. So they flag for the Public Utility Commission the investments that they plan to make. And at that point, there's discussion about whether those investments are the least cost, least risk investments that a utility could invest in. And then there's an acknowledgement, right? And that acknowledgement decision is useful in the later rate case. So a utility, it seems to me, has a fair bit of comfort once the Public Utility Commission acknowledges an investment. It makes it pretty hard for opponents, not impossible by any means, but it makes it pretty hard for an opponent to challenge the prudency of an investment. And in fact, there's an example of that in the Lexington renewable natural gas investment that Northwest Natural made in the rate case in UG 435. The commission explains how that investment was a prudent investment. So it seems to me like this may not be, in my opinion, a place for the state to engage, but rather the Public Utility Commission right now is undertaking an evaluation of its guidelines related to planning and procurement. And it seems to me that that's probably the place to have this discussion. At the end of the day, the Public Utility Commission wants to acknowledge investments that are least cost, least risk. And if the utilities can demonstrate that investing in renewable natural gas is the least cost, least risk, perhaps with the help of the energy strategy, identifying the pathway that makes the most sense for customers of gas utilities, then that seems to me the place for that to happen. But I'd be curious. I'd be like legitimately curious what Brittany and Cascades, I should know your name, I'm sorry, think about whether that is a question that can be resolved at the Public Utility Commission.
Thanks, Kara. I agree. And I think I want to flag here that I don't think that we're at the Department of Energy that we're trying to dive into things that are happening at the PUC. What I think we're trying to get interested in is where people feel like there's pain points or where there's not enough information and where things could be better informed. So this gets to what is being shown on the screen now, which is moving sort of these ideas into these different categories. And one of the things that one of the categories is building on or adjusting or improving existing policy. And so I just wanted to flag that because this is, I think I'm hearing from Brittany and others that maybe there's a need for improvement. But also, Kara, taking into account what you said, which, 100%, I want to just be really clear about that. But I see, first of all, Kara, do you want to follow up with anything on that before I move? I see Devin's hands up, and then also wanted to give Brittany a chance to.
Yeah, it would be great to hear from Devin. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Devin.
Yeah, thanks. So I actually have an interesting perspective on this because I've kind of operated in both worlds. The first half of my career, I worked on integrated resource planning, and now I'm on the renewable side of things. So kind of thinking about it, putting my IRP cap on, I think one of the struggles with integrated resource planning is a timing issue, right? And I know that's probably something more on the PUC side of things, but just kind of outlining that challenge if you're doing an IRP, let's say, you might not be in the same timeline as a RFP process. So just kind of when I was doing some of that planning, oftentimes in a kind of short term, in let's say a 2 to 4 year action plan, which is what we would kind of file on those actionable decisions. I think occasionally if you didn't have an RFP specifically done yet, or the timing of it didn't work out, what you would put in there is we've identified a need for X thousand decatherms or X 100,000 decatherms of renewable natural gas to be solicited through an RFP process. You may not have a specific project that you're able to specifically put in the IRP yet, but in that 2 to 4 year period, what you've identified is a need to fill something, to fill what might be the optimal project. And then it's that fleshing out of, so what is meant by that optimal project, that I think the prudency guidance would be helpful for. I do know that the PUCs do look at programs like the Climate Protection Program, SB 98, findings and guidance that might come out of a process like this to then point to and say, okay, this is how the prudency is going to be seen. It also could very well be done through the PUC where they ultimately set what that is. But I know kind of any kind of feedback or results from this would definitely be looked at by the PUC, even if we're not necessarily trying to tell them what to do here. I think they would at least look at it and take stock in it when trying to figure out that ultimate prudence. That's kind of how I see the relationship between the IRP process. In a perfect world, they align and you're able to say we're doing an RFP, we found this, it slots into our optimization modeling as the least cost option, so we want this project. But it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes you just need to leave a placeholder nebulous. We need X number of volume that we identified as cost effective, and that X will be filled by the RFP.
Thanks, Devin. That was really helpful. I appreciate that explanation. I'm curious, especially Devin and Brittany, I think there's a docket right now, a modernization IRP and an RFP modernization docket at the PUC. Is this part of the discussions going on around that? Do you know? I'm going to assume silence is no.
I mean, I
I'm
can
not familiar.
No, I see
Yeah.
Kara threw something in there. Thanks, Kara. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can put the actual staff memo in it if you want. There will be hearings next week on the 18th and then again on the 20th where commissioners will take questions. So it seems to me like this is a good place for the gas utilities to speak up. I will say that they're definitely thinking about the timing between IRPs and RFPs, and particularly recognizing the need to bring clean investments on faster. And so there is a desire to achieve that and to make IRPs less burdensome. So allowing for shorter updates in between, as opposed to sort of the lengthy dive in that usually happens, and it would happen less frequently. So I do think that in my opinion, the staff is thinking about the connection between IRPs and RFPs and that timing issue that Devin mentioned. I guess yet to be seen whether this is the solution, but it is something that they're thinking about.
Great. Thanks, Kara. I really appreciate everybody jumping in on this. Very interesting points of view. And I think that this is going to kind of lead me into an explanation of where to move the stickies. I think a lot of you are maybe figuring this out, but if you wrote a sticky, feel free to move it into one of the three categories. We sort of see the potential for policy actions in three different places. One is, as I've described before, building on, adjusting, or improving existing policy that's out there. Or you might have something where you feel like there's a new policy that's needed. And then it might be too early to really make informed policy decisions. And so this is a place where we might need to better understand something. That might be something like the need for more study or more pilot programs, or it could be the need for a task force or some working group to look into a subject matter more. So that's sort of the three buckets that we think these can be pulled in. So feel free to move your sticky down into those. And just a reminder, if you want to move the sticky, you have to unclick that arrow that's on the very left-hand corner of your screen. So it doesn't show blue anymore. It should be black. Then you can pull and drag those stickies down into the appropriate places. I just want to quickly move over to one more subject, and we're running a little behind, but I think it's important. We had a sticky where someone wrote something about sustainable aviation fuel and wanting policies to help accelerate that and its use in Portland. So I'm curious if the person who wrote that would care to come off mute and share what they were thinking around this. And really, it would be helpful if you had some specific ideas around what policies are needed to help support that.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. That was my note. It's Dave Bantoff. What I was thinking was along the lines of what Washington State has already done. They had a whole process that they went through with an advisory group to assess in-state production of sustainable aviation fuel. That led to a legislation that included incentives for in-state production of SAF. And so, I don't have specific proposals in terms of what the incentive should be, but putting together, I think a similar process in Oregon would make sense. I know there's a bill that's at least trying to set the first stage for that, trying to create an advisory group to look into this around the incentives for Oregon. But I think something in our group process that highlights the importance of trying to be proactive on SAF is an important component of whatever we're going to do.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that a lot. And that sounds like it would fit really well in what do we need to better understand category. And I'll also flag, there are a lot of bills going on right now, some of which overlap with the work of this group and other groups. And I know it's really hard. We all have, as an example, the Department of Energy, we take no positions on bills unless the governor's office directs us to do so. And so it makes it a little challenging to have some of these conversations, but to the extent possible, it's good if, for instance, if someone thinks that a task force is needed, that would be great. You don't have to indicate a bill or indicate support for or against what's in that bill, but what you think would be some good guidance for a task force that would be investigating that. That would be something that's very helpful to Odo. And I encourage you to do what you can in this meeting, but also following up with comments where you get into more specific information that you want to float as ideas to help inform what we put together for recommendations in the report. And with that, I've run over a little bit, so I'm going to move it back to Michael and we can move on to the next topic. But thanks everybody for the great conversation.
Great. So we're going to do the same exercise. So we're still in the key model finding low carbon fuel development, but right now we're going to talk about feedstocks. So specifically, coming out of the barriers and issue statements, activity, feedstocks were certainly identified, the collection of what feedstocks to use, how to evaluate them as a potential solution. There were some barriers around that. And so thinking of some policy strategies or potential solutions around feedstocks and what Oregon could do. That's going to be the activity we're doing. And it looks like we've got, so just moving around. Okay, so we've got the stickies here. And so we'll fill out, do the same activity we just did. And so we're filling out these stickies. We're going to give you 5 minutes to think about it. There's a couple of prompting questions above. How do we best utilize Oregon waste feedstocks? How can we evaluate the economic value and volume available of waste feedstocks within Oregon? Certainly interested in ideas or potential strategies we could incorporate there. And just to reiterate what Jessica was saying, the greater the specificity or detail that can be added in what you'd like to see will help us try to figure out how to put these together and make it into an actionable policy. So we'll give you 5 minutes and we'll start thinking about that. We'll let you know when we've got a minute left. All right, we've got about a minute left in our brainstorming.
So I think our timer is up. And so I wanted to dive into the conversation a little bit, but feel free to keep adding things as we go along. I kind of wanted to start first with, I think there's a number of stickies that kind of build off of this. One of the stickies that I see here, which is have Oregon's clean, nope, sorry, wrong one. Cost constraints and policies enabling and encouraging low carbon fuel utilization should reflect the market. I see some ideas around dealing with some of the cost constraints, which is tax credits like PTC or ITC potentially, or support for the feedstock providers to help find scale and reduce their costs. I'm just curious if any of the folks who put those up, if they want to jump in and sort of add their perspectives on how to deal with some of this infrastructure, feedstocks and scaling and costs concerns around low carbon fuels.
Hi, that was me again, Brittany with Northwest Natural.
Thanks, Brittany.
Yeah, this goes into our conversation that we were kind of just having, is that we have cost constraints on many of our policies or regulatory tools that allow us to invest into these renewable low carbon fuels. And so it creates it harder to make these investments because of those. A good example is like SB 98 has a revenue cap. We already talked about kind of like we don't really know what is defined as prudent. And that also kind of plays in the CPP conversation as well. So any kind of like, yeah, if there policy that is supportive and allows us to invest in these things is always great.
Thanks, Brittany. It kind of makes me think, do you all feel that it's well understood what some of the costs are, in particular around feedstock feedstock and production? Like, for example, when we did the renewable natural gas and biogas inventory, which was forever ago, pre-COVID, 2018.
Great report.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm curious, I don't think that we had a full understanding at that point of the costs around like feedstocks, getting from where they are found to actual production and things like that. So is that something that is it better understood now, or is there a gap there, something that might need to be understood better?
That's a good question. I think typically when we do see policies, like for example, like California has like bans of like how much you can spend on RNG. Typically when we do see those, they tend to be lower than the market, and the market does switch, fairly quickly. So, having those type of policies that say how much you could spend is just it's hard to keep up with the market. So anything that's like flexible that allows, you know, your investments based on whatever is, you know, the lowest cost resource at the time, would be ideal. I don't know. Devin, do you have any adds to that?
Yeah, the only thing I would also say, I agree with everything you said. I think the other thing to keep in mind that bands that are kind of to Brittany's point, if those limits are high in a falling market, for instance, it can hamper the utilities negotiating leverage because that's all public information, right? Like they're private entities, but they would know what our upper limit is. That gives them a bit of a negotiating advantage that has a negative impact on our customers. So yeah, I would agree 100%. And I think prescriptive fixed numbers is a very dangerous way to go.
Yeah.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Appreciate that.
Can I jump
I was-
in too real quick? Sam
Yes.
Wade again with the RNG Coalition. One of the stickies I put on the previous exercise was trying to align the incentives across the sort of transport end uses into natural gas vehicles and stationary end uses, including just direct utility procurement. I think it aligns with what you just heard from Utility Voices. It's, you know, there should be sort of one market for RNG ideally, and you know, folks should compete in that market and be willing to pay that market price across all end uses. I think that would be probably most optimal from the perspective of developing additional projects. And there have been big cost driver changes recently, especially due to inflationary pressure, and now the tariffs are creating real concern, obviously, because you do use steel and other things when you're building out natural gas or RNG projects. So the prices that previously we expected maybe back in 2018 have shifted because of those types of drivers.
That's great, Sam. Really appreciate that. All right. I also, I've got about 5 more minutes for us to continue in this particular area. So one, I see folks are already doing it, but oh, actually, folks have already done it completely. So I don't need to remind you to move your stickies. That's great. I'm also curious about, so the feedstocks, there have been bills in the past. There's definitely interest in, for example, using forest products as a way to help. If we could capture those and bring them in to be used, that's something that could reduce the wildfire risk while also providing a feedstock. But there are challenges around that. And you know, feel free to jump in on that if you want to. But another thing I'm wondering about is for hydrogen, the feedstock is water and also renewable electricity. So those are a different way of looking at feedstocks. And is there any concern about those feedstocks and how I think they have different markets? They're competing in a different way than some of these other things. And I'm just curious if anybody wants to jump in on that. I know I was hoping Dave might want to jump in, but I think he had to jump off for a bit. But wondering if anybody else has any thoughts around that.
I can speak a little bit about hydrogen. So in general, once again, from the utilities perspective, when we're looking at investing into renewables, we look at the lowest cost resources. So when we compare like green hydrogen to any other resource, it is more costly with technology costs right now for it. And so it never shakes out as like our lowest cost resource. And so therefore green hydrogen is hard for us to invest into.
Yeah, that's understandable. And I think, you know, the modeling indicated that green hydrogen wasn't really going to be a resource that would become cost effective until much later in the process, much later in the timeline, I should say. But just in general, I totally forgot the question I was going to follow up on, Kara. I'm sorry, Brittany. It'll come to me eventually. I think we've got 2 more minutes, and if I remember my question, I will throw it out there. But is there anything else in the that anybody wants to add to as far as the sticky note that they put into the board? And also, I noticed that the what do we need to better understand doesn't have anything in it. And I'm hearing that there's just a lot of market-driven processes that are going on right now. So, and that's fluctuating quite a bit, which is fine. But is there anything else that folks think we need to understand better or get more information on to help sort of inform additional policies to promote or help with low carbon fuels? I see that Pam Neild is on the line. Pam, is there anything that you all have been looking into as far as information or data to help inform your program that it's like there's a gap there in any way, shape, or form?
I'm a bit sick, so I sound about 50% of the way here today.
I'm so sorry.
Can you be more specific in terms of gaps?
No, I guess maybe I could ask, like, are there gaps in informing your program? Are there places where there's more information needed around feedstock costs or access or uncertainty in, like, I guess I know thermal gasification is something that everybody keeps talking about, but it hasn't really come to commercial fruition yet or anything like that. So just wondering if that's the case. And thank you for jumping in as you don't feel good.
Yeah, no,
I appreciate you being here.
no problem. That's why I'm staying off camera. But I mean, I would say gaps into, so my role at the city is primarily with implementing the Renewable Fuel Standard program. And so the real gaps I'm seeing right now are less with feedstock and CI value and more around just general understanding and agreement about CI and about feedstock. So there, it's a new topic for a lot of people. And so different organizations and different stakeholders are coming at these topics from different places. So I don't think that's anything new. That wouldn't be new for any of the other low carbon fuels that we're talking about. But I think that is very real. That public awareness and understanding and engagement is very real and can influence in a really large way whether these projects move forward or not.
So would you say a lack of consistent information and understanding around low carbon fuels, their carbon intensities, and I guess market suitability or something along those lines?
Yeah, I don't know that it's a lack of information. I think it's a lack of agreement and understanding and just a general, I guess, awareness that these are really, really complicated topics. And so not everyone can be an expert at all times, even though people want to be.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. Appreciate your input. And I'm going to pass it back to Michael to move us on to the next subject.
Great, thank you, Jessica. All right, so still in the low carbon fuel development vein, but now we're looking at innovation, and I know I just saw it in the last group we had a policy recommendation around innovation funding, and so this is a great opportunity to think about some strategies around how to support innovation at the state level, or what should the state's role with that be? Like, how do we support innovation while maintaining affordability for Oregon customers? What kind of guidance could the state provide? I know we've already touched on it as far as like PUC rules and kind of dictating prudency and costs versus and timelines and things like that for resources. But what other things could the state do? How could we evaluate or support pilot projects to learn more? how could we do this in a way that we are still prudent and we're avoiding stranded assets, for new fuel assets, but what is the opportunity there? And so if you can think of some policy ideas or strategies that the state could incorporate, that'd be wonderful. And so we'll give you 5 minutes again to do this activity, and then we'll have discussion.
Hi, everybody. Just letting you know that we've got about 1 minute left in this activity. We'll join in discussion after. Okay, time is up. I see we've got a few stickies in there, and I kind of wanted to start with this improving the permitting processes for low carbon fuel projects. Um, and wondering if whoever added that might want to jump in and maybe give some more specifics around some of the permitting issues that they've seen or heard about.
Yeah, hello. This is Antonio Machado with Western States Petroleum Association,
Thanks,
and
Antonio.
maybe I can share just a quick example for. Uh, let's just say we are required to come up with a different type low carbon fuel, and we would be willing to produce it and able to do it. And though there are it's so intricate, it's so complicated that it's hard to explain because, well, as you know, most of the producers of low carbon fuels are in Washington State, and Oregon receives up to 90% of liquid fuels from Washington, and the rest from other states. But if there was an opportunity for our member companies to be able to scale this up, and they needed more tankage, for example, in order to be able to uh, properly separate and segregate, different, types of fuels, it's almost impossible to be able to build a tank in Oregon and Washington. The permitting process is just so terrible that it's just, even if we wanted to do it, just the permitting process itself would take that incentive away. So while we would want to be able to, or even if there were some feedstocks available that you can get at a lower price and be able to produce that fuel at a low cost so that it's not a burden to the population, and you need a bigger tank to hold it and then blend it in some way or manner. The roadblocks are so significant that it's just not able to, we're not able to make that happen. So that's just one example, right? And there are many. So we were thinking that what we see as a threat to us to be able to keep up with the policies and regulations that the states are doing is permitting.
Thanks, Antonio. I appreciate that. I'm wondering if is there a space on something that needs to be better understood here? So as you were talking, it actually made me start to think, what are all the permitting processes that need to be completed here? And what are some of the opportunities that, because you were mentioning things like if a feedstock were to, be something that someone identified as a particularly useful feedstock, it sounded like what you were saying is it would be really hard to jump on that because of the permitting processes. So understanding maybe what timelines there are involved, what are really just getting down to what are the barriers to the different permitting processes, and how that affects the ability to bring low carbon fuels online may not be well understood from the Oregon perspective. Is that a fair assessment of what you were saying?
I think that is, Jessica, and I do appreciate you, trying to understand that. And what we really want to do is to be able to help people understand the infrastructure that we have, what's available, and I, and my members are more than open to share, what are our capabilities. We want to help. We want to meet this. It's just that it is so complicated, and sometimes it is really hard for us to be able to translate this if it's not on a small group where we can explain this to you, and you can see how this is very market driven, and there are so many constraints, but there are always ways that we can do things better and improve, and we want to do that. But maybe I offer this is that whenever you guys want, we can meet, we can discuss, we can tell you what we see, and of course we are moving with the market dynamics, and we have that infrastructure and that flexibility that we try to meet. But that the offer is there. Whenever you guys were available, we would love to enter that discussion. But I just wanted to share that permitting is a big roadblock for us.
And
Thank
may
you.
I jump in with a follow-up question, Antonio? You mentioned storage, and I guess I wanted to clarify. So when you're saying storage for fleets, are you saying like storage at a central location within the state, or are you saying for individual fleets having storage on site of fuels? And I guess, are you saying storage in the standpoint of getting more fuel into Oregon and having it readily accessible, or for pricing, or are you talking about storage for like resilience? So in an event, we want to make sure we have enough storage for our fleets, or if there's some like we're not having access to it. I guess I wanted to clarify when you're talking about kind of the challenges around citing storage.
That's a very good question, Michael, and I appreciate that. And the answer is for everything. It's really storage for when we have a shortage, storage when we have opportunities, storage to ensure that we can segregate those different streams or liquid fuels, or and that we can the better infrastructure we have and the better ability that we have to pivot, the less strain we will see on the end user. And for us, it's very important that we develop this loyalty and trust and credibility with our end users. So because anything else will create, some volatility in many ways. So what we want to make sure is that we have that infrastructure, that we can be a steady source of this. So when I said storage, I meant like that I can store our liquid fuel, that we can store our liquid fuels, that we can store opportunity feedstocks or blending. This would happen more in a different state, because actually the blending of the finished liquid fuel would happen in near refineries or producers, right? But it was just an example that if we saw an opportunity to build a tank, have more storage, and provide a better service, it's almost impossible. It's just and then if we add constraints through regulation and policy, it's almost to the point where some companies are saying, I just cannot produce it. I cannot, I'm not making money. It's not feasible, and they're going to go somewhere else. And the incentive is going to go to another state. And that's why California has a different robust set of refineries, a lot of population, so that even a small sample for a producer is a good incentive, right? So that's where I think that we would love to tell you about it, the West Coast dynamics, how things are produced, and where we get our feedstocks from. We don't want to incentivize feedstocks that come from places that they produce very, very dirty, and then we are regulating to deregulate. So there are many things that we can discuss here, but that's why I just went into one example. But I would be very happy to sit down and chat and discuss this.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing up. I think you brought up a number of different issues there, kind of the challenges within Oregon, and so maybe that's something as we're thinking of these policy strategies, we keep thinking about, but also, I guess from the resilience side, thinking about that of like how we were protecting ourselves in an event, and so thinking of strategies for that. So so please keep adding stickies or whatever, but I think we'll have to kind of evaluate that more as we're looking at policy solutions. Are there opportunities to protect Oregon in the event of resilience, or for pricing market changes or things like that? Advantage there. Thank you.
Thanks both. I will flag we've got about 2 more minutes, and I'm curious, there's in the new policies world, there was a sticky about needing funds or incentives or tax credits for pilot implementation. They specifically mentioned hydrogen. And I'm curious though, somebody wrote innovation funding and it gave an example of Minnesota's Natural Gas Innovation Act. And I'm curious if whoever wrote that wants to jump in and maybe share with us what they thought was were some really good policies in that Innovation Act.
Sorry, I buried my unmute. That was mine again. Brittany Sharp with Northwest Natural. Hi again. Yeah, they have a really cool Innovation Act that allows the utilities to invest in innovation and pilots. And I think that's just really neat because, for example, we had a lot of pilots that we went around and we were doing some of them, but it really allows us to dip our toe into these new innovations and make sure that test them out, make sure they really work, and you know, allow for like in the future more decarbonized resources and more technologies to be used for those decarbonized resources. As we mentioned, some things like woody biomass for pyrolysis. There's some pilots that California legislation has let them put some money towards for some innovation there. And so all these type of innovation policies allow for investment in these things to prove these concepts and then potentially have these technologies available in the future. So anyway, it's a really cool innovation policy. I recommend everyone to look into it.
Thanks, Brittany. I appreciate we always like more information and looking at what other policies have worked well in other places. So that is a great flag for us. I appreciate that input. With that, I'm going to hand it back to Michael, who I think is going to give us a break.
Yes, Jessica. So we're about at 10:30. I think it'd be great if we could come back at about 10:40, and then we'll continue to do these activities. We've got 3 more of these activities, and then we'll wrap up. So if we could just come back at 10:40, that would be great. Thank you, everybody. All right. Thank you, Josh, for pulling up the Miro board. So we've reached 10:40, so we're going to go on to our next brainstorming activity. Hopefully everybody's coming back from the break and is refreshed and ready to go. So we've moved on to the next key policy finding area. And so for this one, we're focusing on demand side resources to provide electricity reliability. So if you remember, when we were looking at the model originally, we have a key policy finding of the, fuels or on-demand resources are necessary as electricity grid grows and becomes even more dependent on having an on-demand fuel resource. And in the model chose gas plants to meet that resource. But it could be, and I guess there were clean gas plants as well as retaining our existing gas electricity generation infrastructure. They wouldn't run very often, but they would still be available. And so what are some kind of policy strategies we can use to either make that an option available or pursue or look at other on-demand resources, or what could we take a look at? So how can we determine what fuels or technology will best provide on-demand resources we need? All right, so we're going to do the same activity we've done previously, where we're coming up with these strategies and then we're putting them in different buckets, whether it's something new or existing, a new policy or existing policy that we want to change, or something we want to better understand. So we'll give you 5 minutes and start that now and start brainstorming and coming up with some ideas for some strategies or policy solutions. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't give you enough of a heads up, but you've got about 20 seconds left here. And of course, you can keep adding as we're talking, but we're going to start talking. Okay, we have finished our 5 minutes, so I want to jump into the conversation. And first, I kind of want to just tee up this, and I think that there's some stickies here that get to this, but when we're thinking about resources for the grid, I think we are thinking about that more broadly than just new utility scale generation, but also what options might there be as far as demand on the demand side, customer side, in helping to support the grid as well. So if you didn't think about that while you were putting your stickies out, just keep that in mind as we start in on the conversation. And really, to kind of get at that point, I saw that we had the first sticky that I noted was about needing really strong incentives for customers and installation, and not just what outdated cost effectiveness metrics would enable, and need to fully value the benefits of demand response. So I'm curious if the person who wrote that would like to expand on that, and understanding like what kinds of incentives they might be thinking about in particular.
Sure. Thank you. This is Tim Miller with Oregon Business for Climate. I used to work in energy efficiency programs and partnered with Energy Trust and others. And, historically, our incentives have been limited to what seems to be enough to trigger someone to take action. And those have been modest and have sort of been designed to spread market activity out over time to make for a nice, smooth, long-term adoption, but we're not in that space anymore. We need to drive this stuff fast. And you all know about adoption curves that start off with innovators and then they move to broader markets. We should really be spurring the first 20% of this activity with super high incentives so that contractors get the idea that, oh, I can put in these new technologies and get paid for it, and those technologies will be more available to Oregon, and costs will come down, and innovations will happen in those technologies, whether it's better controlling your water heater or your furnace or whatever else is going on in your house. So we just need to drive the hell out of this, frankly, and value all the way up to the grid costs of firing up a gas plant. That should be how we value, my Nest thermostat or whatever it is. Not some traditional wimpy valuation of avoided cost.
Thanks, Tim. That's that's a good perspective, especially around, I didn't even mention energy efficiency, but I should have. So thank you for flagging that and bringing it up. And I'm curious around to the point of energy efficiency, and also thinking about like demand side resources. If people have backup generation of some kind, whether it's natural gas or battery storage of some kind, if folks are thinking about how that might play a role in supporting the grid, I'm wondering in particular, Cassandra, if you're available, if the port is thinking about anything like that, or Tim, if there are businesses that you all work with that are interested in that kind of demand side participation, I should say.
Yeah, I guess I should just add that, my comment was about demand response technologies, but you make a great point, Jessica, that efficiency broadly has benefits at the peak. So I don't think we're properly valuing that in our efficiency incentives either. So yeah, and there are companies that all across the state that want to do this work. So there's economic development benefit. There's health benefits in cleaner homes. The benefits are just compounded.
Yeah. Thanks. If I misunderstood exactly what you were saying, I will admit to you, I try very hard to listen to everything everybody's saying, but I'm managing multiple streams of communication. So
you read into what I said better than I said it. That was great.
Thanks, Tim. Cassandra, are you on the line? I'm just curious if the port's been thinking about this. Maybe not.
And you're asking specifically to like battery storage and peak shaving opportunities?
Yeah.
So I mean, currently we are looking with hydrogen infrastructure currently with PNNL, and so they are looking at also the opportunity around battery storage. So it's obviously something that we're interested in, and it's definitely something that we're looking into. I think technology at this point for battery storage and making it feasible in a cost perspective is probably the biggest challenge, along with the peak shaving. So there's different opportunities for different feeders that we have, and so we just need to. We're currently assessing our energy infrastructure anyways, and so that is something that we're looking at for where it makes sense, where it doesn't make sense, and just continuing watching the market with battery technology. I just don't think that at this point it hasn't really penciled out for us, but in the future I do see this as a huge opportunity, especially as a big user of electricity, for sure.
Thanks. Appreciate that, Cassandra. Does anyone else have input or thoughts on sort of the demand side of things when it comes to providing additional resources for the grid? Okay.
Yeah, Jessica, if I could clarify, I guess I'm envisioning the industrial facilities. I mean, when we look at the modeling, certainly we see a large adoption of low carbon fuels within industry, in the hard to electrify sectors. And we're thinking of like high heat applications, industry using a lot of low carbon fuels. So would we start citing low carbon fuel production, or so maybe it would be hydrogen, or it would be something else, or biofuel or whatever, either storage there or the industry's using that more. What would that look like, and what's kind of the state's role in kind of evaluating these potentials, or helping industries either evaluate this as a potential opportunities, how to best utilize low carbon fuels. So it's kind of the standpoint of like, what's the state's role within this versus the market, and then what's the opportunity there, or what could we do to better educate around in this area so we can help with the transition?
Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate that. It kind of makes me think, in particular, Tim and Pam, I'm going to call on you again. How could we improve the evaluation of demand side resources? And it could be, at the level of individual businesses, but it could also go all the way up to industrial scale. And what kinds of, how could we add some valuations to help these kinds of projects and investments sort of pencil out? Do you have any ideas or thoughts around that?
Well, this goes to one of the questions I had. This is Tim Miller again. To ask the modelers, but I haven't been able to go to any of those open hours. I really question whether the model fully appreciates the cost of building another generation plant with new technology, or maintaining an old plant, and keeping people on staff and keeping a guard there every night, or a whole crew of people, and keeping the parking lot clear and mowing the grass and having that facility ready to run at a moment's notice. 365, that I really doubt the model's fully understanding the cost of having something available to run. And so if we fully appreciate those costs and then build those savings into the value of DRs or storage facilities or other things that you're talking about, that will help those other technologies pencil. So I hope that makes sense.
No, that makes absolutely complete sense, Tim. And the model is a fantastic model, but as with all models, it has its limitations. And that's definitely an area where I'm hearing that maybe this is a place where we might need to have some more study or understanding around what the real world costs are in these types of resources versus other types of resources like demand side.
And may I add, Jessica, I mean, Jim, I think that's a study or an opportunity. If you consider thinking about a sticky and putting in there something we want to learn more or better understand, maybe the economics of the rarely used low carbon fuel resource that's on demand versus other opportunities and how that may evolve over time.
Yeah, or even keeping the existing technology gas plants available, as a peaker. That's fair. I'll throw in a sticky.
Thank you.
So this, I see that there's a comment in the chat from Dave. Dave, do you want to just come off mute and kind of talk about what you added in the chat? Because I think there's some interesting discussions around this particular piece.
As I noted, it was kind of a flyer. It's just the top of my head kind of a thing. But on addressing kind of peak and storage, that we don't have, I think, enough. The state hasn't provided enough support, direction, guidance, or whatever you want to call it, to IOUs in terms of trying to accelerate the opportunities in that space. And I just highlighted that, both PAC and PG have these pilot time of use programs, but I don't think there's no urgency around them. I don't think they're planning to scale them up anytime soon. Whereas like Hawaii, where energy prices are through the roof, is already going towards a mandatory time of use this year. And that will drive opportunities to create storage for providing that electricity to the grid during those peak times, 5 to 9 p.m. type times. And if there's programs in combination, so basically it's, get the IUs to move faster on time of use and encourage or direct them to develop programs that are going to maximize the opportunities out of that time of use. And that would be, to me, having them invest in batteries at the residential commercial level, so that one, they like to invest in stuff, so that would provide some opportunity for them to invest. But more importantly, I think scale and accelerate the ability to get stored electricity to meet those peak times. Because if you just kind of wait for individual homeowners or businesses to say, hey, I'm going to put in a battery and I'll sell it to PG or whatever, that's going to take forever.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that input. And it makes me think about somebody else added into the stickies something around utilizing dual system planning. And I think this is getting at sort of that need to manage the electric grid and the natural gas system that currently happens at the PUC in two separate spheres of activity, I guess, and understanding how these two could more efficiently operate together and thinking through the planning for the future system, which is what I think the sticky is getting at. But maybe the person who wrote that would care to jump in and talk about that.
Hi, it's Brittany Park from Northwest Natural. That one was fine. And yes, exactly. That would be amazing if we could, instead of having two different dockets, we could work together our energy systems to make sure that we have, the best efficiency for the supplying energy needs here in Oregon.
I'm curious too. So we know that a lot of the big the larger loads, data centers, for example, often have natural gas generation as their backup, and opportunities around that to help manage the grid better too. And Brittany, this may or may not be for you, but I'm just kind of throwing it out there. And wondering if that's something that others have seen discussion on or interested in, sort of these larger demand side resources that are out there.
Unfortunately, that's not my area of expertise. There's someone else on my team that definitely I could get back to you with their response on that. They work on the behind the meter kind of customer solutions.
Unfortunately, our electric utility representative on the team wasn't able to join us today. So I don't have an electric utility to flag for that, but I'm kind of curious, Dave, if you might have heard about anything along those lines, or I don't know if Kara's back on the line or if she's heard about anything along those lines in Oregon or elsewhere.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kara.
No, go ahead.
Well, I didn't quite catch the question is around what? Sorry, I missed it.
Oh, sorry. Whether or not there are electric utilities out there that are working with large customers who have natural gas resources or even battery storage resources that they could help to meet peak load on occasion. Like, I think I've read recently something about a Midwest state. I can't remember the specific state, where there had been a new pilot project where they were going to a data center. I don't remember who owned it, was going to share some of their power for the electric utility if they needed it for peak. If you've heard about anything like that, or I'm thinking of like maybe tariff design or utility policy, or I'm sorry, Public Utility Commission policies that help frame that up better.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that we're still sort of in baby steps here with our with our data center load and how we manage it on the investor-owned utility distribution system. But your question about backup generation is an interesting one. I do know data centers are thinking about alternatives to diesel generation, and one of those things would be biomethane as backup. The difficult thing about large loads is that, and particularly data centers, is that they do have to have access to 24/7. So I guess I'd be curious. I think with new large loads changing, we might see the kind of demand that's being placed on data centers is changing. With AI, there will be more sort of peaks and valleys as opposed to typical data center use where it's pretty flat. I think there's possibilities. I just think we're not quite there yet.
Thanks, Kara.
I'd add, I mean, there's obviously a lot of, I think most of the focus in Oregon's not as behind the curve on this, but in California, for instance, is around, larger utility scale storage that is just being built to provide that resource to meet capacity needs and things like that. And I think that's deemed kind of the most efficient approach to date. I'm sure California's done a lot of work around trying to get storage at existing, industrial or large commercial facilities as well. And but I don't have any specifics around that. I know that PG worked on a bill, I think it was last session, to essentially to give them authority to work with existing customers who have either backup generation of diesel type backup generation, but to try and prioritize battery as backup generation for them to then contract with those entities so that stored energy can be available in peak times, kind of along the lines of what I was saying in terms of the residential possibilities. I don't know how much they've done with that though. So that'd be a good follow-up as to if they see that as a scalable or if it's growing opportunity area.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave. So I'm hearing there's definitely, we're in the infancy around this, but there's the need to understand what the potential is in with this respect, I think is a fair way to assess it. Yes, no. Hearing nothing, I'll assume I summed it up okay.
Yeah, and I would go further and suggest that, in terms of policy recommendations, that again, I don't want to over task force things, but there ought to be some wonky group of experts that include non-IOU participants to talk about how could utilities, how could the grid most effectively scale around storage opportunities, both utility scale just storage, but also backup storage in terms of existing residential and commercial.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. To your first point, I would point out to folks that there is there is this, like, you don't want to have something like the energy strategy come out and say, here's all these things we need to study. That's, it's actionable, but not particularly helpful in the near term. And we definitely want to focus on things we can action on in the near term. But a lot of this question is further, the concerns around this are a little further afield than the next 5 years. Maybe not that much further afield, but a little bit. So things where we need to understand better, I think are totally appropriate in this area, as well as things that we can action on immediately. And I see, Tim, your hand is up.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that last point that Dave made, which in the Hawaii example, for example, as noted, we would need groups that are to figure this out beyond just the IOUs whose incentives are not to build out a bunch of equipment on the other side of the meter, at the household level, unless we work on their business model so that they can fully earn a return on those pieces of equipment. The IOUs aren't the best voice for telling us how to maximize this activity because it's not in their incentive to maximize that activity. So we need to look beyond that, beyond their expertise to other expertise and incentive to get this stuff done.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just piggyback on Tim's point? This is Dave again. There's that bill this session that would create performance-based rate making, and so a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is subject to significant policy shifts. If that were to pass, that might change the whole dynamic. If PUC then starts making storage one of the performance-based priorities, then utilities will start investing in it. So, but short of that, Tim's points, exactly what I was suggesting is we need broader coalition of folks talking about this than just the IOUs.
Thank you very much. I appreciate Tim, Dave, both of you for that. And I got so interested in this conversation that I noticed that we are 5 minutes past time. So I need to move us on, and I apologize for that. But I would really encourage you both and anyone else to expand on that and send us written comments through the comment portal, more about what the opportunities are that you see there. I think that's a really important piece. All right, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. Yeah, so this next discussion area, if you remember, the key model findings were on kind of like the cost effectiveness of electrification of many applications, but beyond electrification, how can we help hard to electrify end uses? How can we make it happen and help inform investment decisions, whether that's in transportation or in industry or just the hard to electrify areas in general? So if you're thinking about electrification being the most cost-effective application for many, or electrification is most cost-effective for many applications, but we still know there's strategic uses for low carbon fuels and a variety of different uses that are just not going to electrify anytime soon. So what is the state's role versus the market in kind of helping that adoption of low carbon fuel use? So within the industrial sector, is it making the business case or improving access for industries? For transportation, how can we encourage maritime use of low carbon fuels and aviation use? What's the opportunity there? And so again, going through the exercise, you can start thinking of some policy solutions. And I'll remind you that we have the issue statement barriers over there in the kind of purplish box over the left. Those are kind of the summaries of what we came up previously. And what kind of solutions can we come up to address those in particular? So we'll give you 5 minutes and then we'll talk more about it. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, just giving you your 1 minute warning here. Okay, we hit our timer. I'm going to dive into some questions around what's needed in order for people to be able to, I guess, identify more options for low carbon fuels with their businesses or in industry. And I see we had one sticky around reminding of an earlier idea of keeping the climate protection program strong and incentivizing new technologies, funding pilots. All of these are important things to help sort of support that low carbon fuel usage. I'm curious right now if maybe, again, I'm going to flag Cassandra, about low carbon fuels being used at the port. And in particular, I'm kind of thinking around places where we know electrification will be really difficult, like maritime use. And, you know, we could even talk about sustainable aviation fuel for the airport. Like, what are the, what's the port kind of thinking about with respect to adopting these fuels? And what are some of the challenges that you've been facing in that maybe there are supportive mechanisms that the state could do to help address those challenges?
Yeah, I think for maritime fuels, I think the IMO hasn't come forward with, you know, one true fuel contender. They're approaching greenhouse gas a little different around low carbon fuels. So, you know, we received a Clean Ports grant, so that is an opportunity for us to really explore where marine vessel ship owners are leaning towards, what alternative fuels, what's the current infrastructure within our Pacific Northwest, what are some barriers, and how the port can play a role in that, because we are not a fuel supplier. You know, so there's limitations. We don't have control around how people use fuel, what fuels, you know, it's similar with aviation as well. Concerning SAF, you know, FAA and IPCC and all the organizations are in a pretty big agreement that SAF is going to be a huge contender on reducing greenhouse gases for commercial airlines. Electrification is not, and hydrogen. There's been huge limitations in technology. The energy density of both of those is just, you know, it just doesn't make sense for commercials. I think for short distance, that's been a fairly big contender. So, you know, of course, low carbon fuels is going to be very important for that sector. The biggest limitations is incentive programs. Oregon, currently California and Washington does have incentives for production and blending, because as you guys know, SAF still requires a blending ratio for safety of airlines. So Oregon has just been a little bit more behind. So therefore, you know, SAF making it here at PDX has been a little bit slower, as well as the infrastructure. Blending needs to occur. And so that infrastructure, all the PDX is a pretty good contender for that in particular, just because the way the fuel infrastructure is already sitting. So like SeaTac has to truck in their SAF. So we have a lot more because they're directly on the Olympic pipeline. So we have infrastructure, we have the CEI hub. And so we just need the blending infrastructure. And I think the biggest issues with that currently is just operational and permitting. So we can't speak for any fuel storage tank owners, but that has been what we've been seeing within the in our fuel supply chain, is just the permitting and the community concerns around that.
Thanks, Cassandra. I appreciate that. And I have a follow-up question for you, but I also want to ping, I'm interested to hear if Tim's the folks that he represents have an interest in this or challenges that they've been facing as well. So Tim, I'm mostly just pinging you that I'll be calling on you soon. I'm curious, Cassandra, about going back to, well, I have two questions for you. One, there's this ability to electrify. So I think I've read, correct me if I'm wrong, that all of the planes are on shore power, electric shore power, when they're at the gate at the airport. And I'm wondering if that's similar for maritime vessels at the port. And so this idea of electrifying where it is feasible and possible, and then having the fuels available where it's not possible, or at least not possible today. If that's like, if that I think would just work itself out as far as like costs that you all would be looking at, but I'm just curious if there's any challenges in that space or opportunities in that space you want to flag. But also, you mentioned at the very beginning, there's just a lot of different options for fuels, you know, that rise to the top often are sort of the renewable biogas fuel type fuels, or potentially hydrogen in the future. And if that uncertainty is also something that is giving challenges to you all when you're thinking through what pilots you want to do.
So you're asking about at birth, basically?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think some of the bigger challenges is really more from an operational standpoint. So birthing shore power requirements is required through CARB, so California. And so not all of those ships necessarily make it up to our site. So whether or not they have the infrastructure currently, the biggest opportunity for us too is auto ro-ros, so auto roll-ups and roll-offs. They down in California, it seems like where they're kind of navigating is not less on shore power capabilities, but potentially more on like a capture and control to meet those berth requirements. So for us, we have to look at an operation. We don't necessarily get the same calls to our port too. So like I think we have a fairly low percentage. I don't want to call out something that is inaccurate, but in 2021, we evaluated that, and we have, and for a frequent call visit, it would need to be considered over 6, and I think we have less than 10%. So from an operational standpoint, it's hard for us to figure out with the shore power portion of it, how many of those ships have that capability, and whether or not it would be worth the investment because it is so expensive. There's also not currently, there's not a universal plug-in. And so those connectors, so that's also a big challenge as well when it comes to shore power. So there needs to be some standardization so that we understand what equipment needs to be installed there. So there's some limitations there, and there's a cost as well. And then your other question with electrification hydrogen, is that for maritime, commercial, or both?
Any and all. All of the above.
So again, maritime, I think that Clean Port study, we're really going to try to understand a lot more where those alternative fuels are emerging. California did, I think, a proposal for Senate bill currently for looking at that. California is just ahead because they have all kinds of air quality issues down there. And so they are pushing for looking at what infrastructure needs to occur, and then what is a potential contender for that. I haven't heard too much about fuel cells for hydrogen. I would assume that's kind of where you're going with this rather than a combustion source. So it is really heavy. And when you're considering hydrogen, especially in a fuel cell, it's just so heavy you would have to reduce your cargo loading. And I don't know what that actually looks like. So I think that technology still needs to occur. I know there's a lot of places that are more looking at ammonia fuel cell, also the infrastructure for hydrogen. So to transport it and stuff. So I think there's a lot of limitations with hydrogen in that sense of whether or not it could come up commercially viable for a lot of these sources by 2050. So that it may just take a lot longer. And I think the same thing for aviation as well. I think hydrogen, like Airbus was kind of the big technology that was really looking at short distant aircrafts fleet. And they've had some big technology setbacks. And so I don't think they're as far along as they predicted them being. So again, the technology just needs to occur. I know there's some up in Washington, I think there's been some electric technology movement. So that industry seems to be moving a little bit quicker. But again, the technology is just not quite there. So we are, of course, putting that, because electricity requires you, some of our general aviation would need to, we would need to supply that. We're looking at that from our energy infrastructure planning feasibility of just trying to scope that out. But I think the technology is just not quite there, that it's hard for you to really plan for that.
Gotcha.
I think I answered, but let me know. Yeah, I think there's just a lot of unknowns at this point, and with the current administration, also unknowns with whether or not money will be spent on the scaling of those different fuel sources. So.
Thanks, Cassandra. Very, very helpful information, and similar to what we're hearing in like on-road transportation for big vehicles in the same vein. So I did want to open it up, Tim, to see if you had anything you wanted to add from the members of your organization indicating sort of a need for low carbon fuels with the work that they do. And then I also wanted to just tee up Brittany and Devin and see if there's if you're getting requests from customers for access to low carbon fuels, and if there's sort of like a specific area of industry or businesses that you're seeing that from. So Tim, do you have anything that you wanted to add about that?
Sure. Yeah, one of the things we do is we run a program to help, in partnership with Climate Solutions and several other groups, we run a program to help fleets decarbonize their fleets. So a lot of that is around electrification, but there's also demand for adoption of low carbon fuels. So we've had 5 of those cohorts, and a lot of demand for companies that want to adopt these technologies and these solutions from fuels to electrification. Companies want to reduce their emissions, but they also want there are brand benefits to decarbonizing their fleets. There are health benefits in their maintenance shops and with their drivers to decarbonize their fleets. So yes, there is demand for this, and you're seeing that, in all kinds of adoption of renewable diesel already, and more historically biodiesel, and then the demand for electrification in trucks is what we're seeing right now, and trying to keep the advanced clean truck rules in place, frankly.
Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. Brittany, Devin, and actually I also wanted to flag Sam. If you've been hearing about interest in accessing biogas, renewable natural gas from different parts of industry or businesses that you engage with.
Yeah, we do get requests from some of our industry partners asking for low carbon fuels. We do have a smart energy program set up in place, and folks can participate in that program, and folks do. So yes, we do get a lot of interest from our industry partners. A lot of times it's cost prohibitive, and so that limits their ability to be involved.
Yeah, and I can provide Cascade's perspective. I
Mhm.
think it's a little bit more challenging for us, being that our service territory is a bit more rural, and I think the demand for clean fuels is not as high among that population, typically, not to overgeneralize. In Washington, we've had our voluntary program up for a little while, and we've seen practically non-existent uptake. In Oregon, we have had some conversations with some larger customers who have expressed interest, but it's still very preliminary. So we're hopeful, but there has not been a there's not been a severe amount of interest, I would say.
Thanks, Devin. Appreciate that. Um, and Sam, anything you want to add before I move us on? Oh, maybe Sam's not on. I apologize. I thought he was. Maybe he had to drop off. Oh, yes, he had to drop off. Okay, well, then I'm going to hand it back to Michael to take us on to the next topic.
Great, thank you. Okay, so this is our final topic. As you remember, the modeling finds that fuel demands declines over time, and so within this, thinking in terms of what are the policy implications of kind of decommissioning or repurposing existing infrastructure across the supply chain. So thinking of policy solutions around what the role could or should the state play in potential repurposing or restructuring existing infrastructure across the supply chain, what regulatory barriers limit changes in fuel supply or business models. So we talked a little bit about innovation earlier around low carbon fuel. So what about innovation in terms of business models? What's the state's role and how can it support wanting to keep, if fuel demand is declining, but we still need to keep fuels available, how do we keep people in business? How do we keep Oregon businesses going if fuels are going to decline? And what does that look like? And what's the state's role? So we'll give you, again, 5 minutes to start coming up with some policy ideas and some strategies to address this. Okay, we look forward to what you come up with.
Hi, everybody. I'm just jumping in to acknowledge this is a tough one. And I see we're having just a few stickies that have popped up. So just want to encourage you to think from the perspective of the challenges that are being faced, but what opportunities there are, and maybe the potential policy solutions might be in what can bridge the challenges to those opportunities. So might want to think along those lines as you're working on this. Well, I completely failed in giving you a heads up and a warning, so I'm going to give everybody another 15, 20 seconds to wrap up any thoughts they had. Okay, it looks like people have wrapped up. So I kind of wanted to jump into this by first, last time we chatted, I said, there's some difficult conversations that are occurring in particular in this working group. And I just first appreciate all of the positive, constructive feedback as we've been working through some of these things. There's a level of trust that we all have to establish here, which is difficult. And I want to acknowledge that. So I'm going to try and ask some maybe perhaps pointed questions. I am not a master of any particular energy topic. If anything, I know more about transportation electrification than anything else, and certainly not fuels. So, I might ask a question that's really out of bounds, out of craziness, and it's just me trying to get the conversation going. So if I ask anything that gives anybody a heartache, feel free to just jump in and say, well, I don't think you have that quite right. And that's fine, but I do want to jump into the conversation and try and get some good potential solutions out of this discussion. So I noticed that there's two stickies, one around gas utility pilot projects for TENS, which is Thermal Energy Network Solutions. And then another one, gas utility engagement in voluntary targeted electrification. So those do make me curious. We know that there's, the model indicates that there will be reduced use of the natural gas fuel. We know that we still need to maintain that fuel for the hardest to electrify customers. A lot of industry, for example, will still need to rely on fuels even in 2050. So I'm curious, I'm going to put Brittany and Devin perhaps on the spot, but if you have anything to add to like these ideas around what natural gas companies could think about that's really different as far as your business model goes, what some of the challenges are or barriers around that, or where you might be looking for more support or different opportunities to assist with some of that creative business model thinking.
All right, I'll go first.
Thanks, Devin.
It's a difficult subject, obviously, for sure. And I don't think Brittany and I are probably at the level of our corporations to kind of weigh in too strongly on something like this, right? I think you have addressed a lot of the major points that, for something such a delicate subject matter, it really does have to be a collaborative effort. And I think the people that need to buy into it are kind of at more of the executive level, getting them on board with what is a business model that could work. I will say one of the sticky notes, I didn't write this, but I thought it was fantastic, was the pilot projects for TENS. I know Washington is pretty heavily involved in TENS, and I think TENS is a fantastic option for, it's an avenue for utilities to gain rate base, which is always desirable. It's an innovative solution. It's one that I think, I'm not an expert on it, but my understanding is that there's been some really strong proven success around it. So I think that is that's one that I really do want to kind of just emphasize and highlight as a good one. And then beyond that, I think it truly is understanding that challenge of we don't want to be a hindrance and an enemy in this, but I mean, and I'm going to take a step back and say I'm speaking as Devin and not as my utility here. So this is, I'm going a little bit off the cuff, but when electrification, if we're going to really put cards on the table, is saying we want to take business away from you. And that's not a bad thing per se. I understand that beneficial electrification is a strong concept, but to kind of help prevent that vitrolic, visceral reaction towards that. I think finding that pathway, and I'll be honest, I don't know what that is, but I think it is important. And I think if it's presented, I think it can help lead to those beneficial electrification pathways that I think a lot of us on this call acknowledge can be a positive.
Thanks, Devin. First, I appreciate you jumping in and offering all of that up. I recognize it's difficult. I just wanted to add that Kara threw in the chat that she was the one who wrote the gas utility pilot projects for TENS. And she also indicated that she thinks gas utilities are really well liked by their customers and can really provide value there. So I wanted to flag that because I think that what Kara writes is something we're hearing quite a bit from people, and also that this is an opportunity to look for ways to continue to find opportunities for the natural gas companies to provide great value to their customers as well as overall to the state. So
Yeah.
I want to thank both of you for adding that.
Yeah, thanks, Kara, for that comment. It's good to hear. Yeah, I'll add a little bit to Devin's comments. Yeah, very excited to see about the piloted TINs. Actually, Northwest Natural right now is working on a TINs pilot project. So we're very excited to be part of that. And in general, we definitely want to invest in TINs projects, geothermal energy efficiency projects. And as we've talked before, one of the biggest barriers for us to invest into these type of solutions is making sure that we have supportive policy that allows us to invest in these and make sure that we have very predictable, accountable policy on rate recovery so that we know that we can invest in those things. So that's like the biggest barrier on these things as well, because Northwest Natural we actually have staff that this is their full-time job, is working on TINs and geothermal energy. And so we want to invest in these things, and we just want to make sure we have supported policies so that we're able to do that. One of the things to think about as like developing policy is, because a lot of these type of energy systems are, kind of newer, a lot of times they're, if you have prescriptive policy that says you have to do this, a lot of times these like really cool innovations are missed in that. So we just like to bring up that, like, as we're developing policy, it's really a benefit to have target-based policy. Like, we want to decarbonize by this much, but the pathway to get there not be as prescriptive, so that we're able to invest in these type of like really cool technologies like geothermal and TIN systems. So
Thanks, Brittany. So if I could wrap up, what I think I'm hearing is it would be helpful if the natural gas utilities had, for lack of a better term right now, a safe space to innovate and to be able to operate within, obviously important constraints around costs and viability of projects. But I think, having some sort of guidance around what that might look like to give a better sense of comfort to the natural gas utilities would be helpful. Is that what I was hearing?
Sorry, say that again. I got distracted by reading the comments for a second.
That happens. I think I was just thinking that what I think I'm hearing is that natural gas utilities would benefit from having a quote unquote safe space to be able to innovate in, and having some very helpful guidance around what that safe space might look like is important, but being able to innovate in a way that gives them more opportunities to think about what their future might look like. Is that what I was hearing?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, cool. Sometimes I wrap things up for you guys just to make sure that, one, I understand it, and two, to make sure others could jump in if they wanted to add on to that. So, and yes, and Kara flagged that, the climate protection program is one of those places where we are giving like specific targets to hit, but hopefully allowing for innovation to happen in that respect. And considering that, I wanted to pull in, so I'm gonna give Brittany and Devin a moment to breathe, and I want to pull in some other folks to think about, like, what is the certainty that you need to see in, with your customers or the people that you work with, and the people that I'm thinking about here are like Tim and Sam and Antonio, maybe Dave Antoff as well. Like, where are those? What regulatory certainty would be helpful in respect to fuels as people are working towards renewable fuels, and where are there policies that might be less helpful in that respect? And I'll just open that up for everybody. Oh, come on, Tim, Sam, Dave, you guys can't let Brittany and Devin be the only brave ones in the group.
Well, okay, I would say that one of the advantages of the climate protection program is it outlines a 25-year plan for decarbonizing our economy and driving our emissions down. Knowing that framework is in place is important for the businesses to be able to plan against it and make investments around it and decide, oh, okay, so it looks like this is going to be happening, so I'm going to invest to make sure my fleet or my plant or whatever uses clean fuels or transitions to clean fuels, or that my next purchase is not going to be a piece of equipment that commits me to 10 or 15 more years of some technology. So uncertainty around a policy like that and lawsuits and everything else makes it harder to plan. So if we're looking for comfort and regulatory certainty, that's one to just have in place and then start aligning everybody around it.
I'd add, the Clean Fuels Program, I think, is less risk, or it's been around longer, and that doesn't look like it's going away. So but certainly around that program, also on top of the CPP, is important from a low carbon fuel perspective. And then we talked in previous panels or whatever in terms of ways to for in-state production of low carbon fuels, the lower the CI, I think, that Oregon is promoting the better chance for in-state production.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. So I want to ask a follow-up question. My understanding is the Clean Fuels Program, it offers some degree of certainty about what the expectations are to hit the carbon intensity goals, but it also provides incentives in the forms of being able to sell the credits to get money to help fund some of this work to build infrastructure and acquire fuels and things like that. So are there things like along those lines that could benefit, like helping fuel providers, fuel developers comply with the climate protection program that aren't currently available? Not just for Dave, for anybody.
I mean, I'd be interested to hear other folks' perspectives. I mean, I think with CPP and clean fuels, and if you have a low CI expectation, that's for most of the clean fuels, that's what we need, and supply will follow, and there won't be these perceived barriers over time. For SAF, I think it's going to need a little bit more incentivization to try and maximize opportunities for in-state. I mean, the only issue that I can think of is competition with West Coast states that have similar type programs like Washington and California, and making sure that that the available low carbon fuels aren't going to those states instead of to Oregon.
Thanks. Good flag, Dave. Anybody else want to add on that? And then I want to move over to what Kara wrote in the chat. But I want to give anybody else an opportunity to jump in on that.
Well, just to your question, Jessica, about are there other things that can help incentivize that activity? I would just say that the markets built into the CPP allow innovators, particularly folks bringing clean fuels in, and others, to monetize their early progress to anybody else in the CPP. So if you're an energy intensive trade exposed plant that's having trouble decarbonizing, or you want to take a big leap in 5 years, but it's a little bit hard to meet the needs for the first 5 years, then you can buy credits from those early innovators in the clean fuel side. So that all helps drive money to early action, so that, you know, because folks can sort of plan their long-term decarbonization.
So that's a good flag, Tim. And I think, thanks for saying that, because in my head, I was thinking about how the Clean Fuels program allows for like loaning credits up front to give fleets an opportunity to make investments that they need to make to switch to, say, electricity or whatever fuels that they want to move to. So I hadn't thought about it in that way. So thank you for that clarification. That's really helpful. And before I move to Kara, I just want to flag, Antonio, is there anything that you want to add to this conversation? I feel like your perspective would be really helpful as well.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, I have some thoughts, and it is I'm trying to put them together. We see that there's going to be a decline in fossil fuel demand, but we see this as being very, you know, it's going to be a long-term effect. I do agree that the neighboring states' low carbon fuels programs will be a competing. They will compete with each other, right, to a certain extent, and unfortunately, Oregon doesn't have refining capacity, so I just would be concerned of doing anything that would discourage producers from sending or able to allocate barrels into the area. And, and as we go into the transition mode and trying to understand better technologies, you know, do it that way. It's just that if we pull too hard, then we're going to feel it very, very harshly in Oregon first.
Thanks, Antonio. Appreciate that perspective on this. So we're getting close to time, but this is a really important conversation. So I want to move over to something that Kara wrote in the chat. And Kara, I don't know what an LEA is, so I'm hoping you can maybe jump in and kind of explain this program a little bit for everybody. I'm curious. And if I'm the only one,
Of course. Yeah. So I mean, it is a little bit complicated, but LEA is a line extension allowance. It's the way that utilities, both gas and electric, help to subsidize growth of their system. Subsidize, there's some disagreement about whether that's the correct word or not. It's supposed to equal out. So you are adding additional customers that presumably benefits existing customers when you add new ones, because then we're all sharing, there are more of us sharing the costs, fixed costs. And so the question at the Public Utility Commission has been, you know, given the costs of complying with the climate protection program and the worry about stranded costs as folks voluntarily electrify, we're going to have a smaller and smaller number of people on our gas system. So we want to make sure we're not investing in growth, or rather that existing customers aren't helping that growth happen, right? And so here we submitted testimony, as did CUB in Avista's rate case. There we proposed, rather than replacing their leaky pipe, which is very expensive and will be around for, you know, a book life of 30 years, I think, even longer probably in reality, that instead think about treating targeted electrification and investing in electric appliances that then the utility can earn a rate of return on. So it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about this, but again, I analogize it to this line extension allowance. This doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. We know our electric utilities are going to have trouble doing an energy transition in an affordable, efficient way. But let's help decarbonize the system in a way that makes sense. And as I said, gas utility customers really like their gas utilities. Gas utility customer service is really top notch, and particularly in places like with publicly owned utilities where rates are very inexpensive, and where we know the electricity is very clean, where gas utility territory overlaps. That makes a lot of sense to assist electrification first in those areas, and particularly for low income customers.
Thanks, Kara. I really appreciate your input on that, and I'm going to flag for Brittany and Devin. I'm going to call on you, I think, one last time. What you described, Kara, really resonated with me, because I was also thinking about, I know that some natural gas utilities have specific areas, geographic areas in their territories where pressure can become an issue, and wondering if areas like that where, I know historically they've made demand response investments, and that's great. If these are also areas where opportunities to electrify might be useful. So I'm going to just leave it at that, as far as like, here's a space to operate in. And I'd like to open it up to help, hopefully help Brittany and Devin, like what are, other than, changing the utility business model, do you have any other barriers or concerns around being able to look at your systems in a way that could look for opportunities where electrification could happen, in a way that would have the least impact on the system that the total system that you're operating? So I just want to tee that question up, and I'm really looking at like technological concerns or issues more than anything, because I know the other piece of it is more challenging to talk about.
This is Devin again. I can't think of any technological. I will say, once again, with my background in IRPing, I do, looking at non-pipeline alternatives is definitely a part of the distribution planning process in IRPs. It's something that OPUC staff is pretty abundantly clear about, that they want utilities to make sure that they're looking at both pipe and non-pipe alternatives when figuring out it, before any kind of distribution project would be considered for acknowledgement. You really need to show that you've done your homework on non-pipe alternatives. So I think those processes are already definitely in place, and I think a part of the calculus, I would imagine, I'm not involved in that, I would imagine it is environmental compliance costs. I will kind of flag, and this has been kind of talked about by others already, but one of the challenges when it comes to this kind of joint utility planning is there are occasional hiccups on getting data from others to kind of complete that holistic analysis when it comes to kind of an electrification and you're trying to do that alternatives analysis. Anecdotally, I spoke with our IRP manager, and he reached out to one public one of the PUDs in Washington. I don't remember which, and a lot of the planning that we do on the IRP side of it are things that they don't have as requirements, and they don't have the staffing, frankly, to even be able to provide inputs to figure out what might be that calculus. So I guess maybe on a technical side, that is one thing that I would flag, is some challenges around on maybe some of the smaller sides. Obviously, the bigger electrics, I think, are going to be able to have a lot of that information, but some of the smaller PUDs might have some challenges having that data.
Thanks, Devin. I really appreciate that. That's very helpful input. Brittany, do you have anything that you would like to add around this?
No, I don't. The only thing I was going to say is like more robust dual system planning, but Devin already covered that.
Brilliant minds. All right, well, thank you. I really appreciate everybody jumping in. Thank you for staying a few minutes late. Michael's got a few more things to cover briefly before we move on, but also I just want to thank all of you for engaging fully and helping to have this discussion. It's a challenging one, but I see a lot of good information came out of this, and I think we can have additional future great conversations come out of it. So thank you very much. And Michael, why don't you go ahead with the final notes?
Thank you, Jessica. So I just want to highlight, we've got some upcoming meetings. In particular, we've got one last modeling office hours for the EJ and Equity Focus Group on the 21st. We've got the complementary analysis info session, which is certainly going to be helpful, and it'll provide some additional analysis around the energy wall, air quality, and geospatial mapping analysis. And we are requesting that you attend that meeting, because in the next meeting on April 30th, we will be kind of digging into that and trying to figure out how that kind of fits into some of our policy solutions. I am going to try to consolidate all the ideas we collected today and share them back out to the group, so everyone can reflect on them. I know not everybody was able to make it today, and so we'll see if we can get some more feedback on that and kind of get back to it on April 30th, our next meeting, so we can build on that. So I will follow up with these meeting times to make sure everybody has them, make sure everybody can attend the future meetings. And I'll just highlight that we do have our public comment portal. And so if you attended as a general public member, please provide comments through that. And we certainly appreciate all your feedback there. Thank you, everybody, for making time today. I'm sorry we're a couple minutes over, but I think it was a great conversation and really helpful. And be looking for more information coming from me soon. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Good day.